Story 1, this is Fireteam Delta. Dad's coming home. Welcome to the Military Veteran Dad Podcast, where it is our mission to bring every dad home. I am your host, Ben Killoy. I'm a United States Marine veteran, husband, and a father. We will bring authentic conversations to inspire action in your life so we can close the gap between the dad you are today and the dad you want to be tomorrow. This is the Military Veteran Dad Podcast. Before we get started with this week's episode, I just want to drop in with a few announcements. Starting this Thursday, we're going to start a new monthly bonus episode. And this week's episode does disappoint. It's Alyssa Van Langeveld, child psychologist, who talks about spending just 10 minutes with our kids can make a huge impact on the needle from that dad you are today to that dad we talk about being in the future. We dive into a lot of different areas around that 10 minutes, from punishment to how it can shape your kids' emotional regulation of how they deal with things. And we're going to continue the conversation on that bonus episode on our blog throughout the month. So be sure to join in and comment. And if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date. Next, if you haven't left us a review on iTunes, I would really appreciate it. And it would help us climb in the ratings and bring this message to even more dads and help even more dads come home. Looking into the future, we've got even some bigger rock stars coming on the show, like this week's episode with David, who has a story you almost can't believe. And it took me to a world I haven't even known before. That's good, because so much of what we are missing in a society is depth to our views. The more depth we have, the more insights and wisdom we can provide. That's all I have. Now on with the show. And again, thank you for being a continued supporter of the Military Veteran Dad Podcast. Today on the show, we have David Mike. He is a Christ follower, husband, father, blogger, author of Dishonor, One Soldier's Journey from Desertion to Redemption, and he currently is a cosmetology instructor in Omaha, Nebraska. David is passionate about sharing the message that we do not have to be defined by our past and that God can use our mess for good. David, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Go ahead and describe what your family looks right now and any gaps in that intro that you want to fill in this.
Well, I've been married to my wife for 20 years this month, actually. So we just celebrated our 20th anniversary. We have 3 beautiful daughters, and I have an 19-year-old college student, a 16-year-old high school sophomore, and an 8-year-old second grader. I also have a set of 20-year-old twins from a previous marriage that live in Colorado. But currently I teach cosmetology. I teach people how to cut hair. And I'm also an author of a book. It's a memoir of my dishonorable past from my military career. So.
And I've been reading about it. I was about halfway through before our interview, and it's a real world of story that I've almost never had anything come close to my life. Living in just southern Wisconsin here as a farm boy, like a lot of your story is just something I've never had to experience in my life. For good, but at the same time, it's like it was also for me, like I was just looking through your eyes of how your life shaped you from where you are today and the dad you are today and how far you've come from that person that I was reading about in the book. When you hear the words "come home" for any stage of your life, what stage or what do those words mean to you today as a father, a husband, what you've reflected on, what you've gone through in your past?
Well, currently, in the day and age of technology, being present and attentive is a struggle. We got our cell phones that pretty much absorb our lives, and it's a common theme and a norm in our society today. So just being intentional about engaging with each other would be what coming home means to me. In a different aspect, I would say also we have a saying at our church that real is better than perfect. And that means that, obviously you're not going to run around being a mess your entire life, but being open about your scars, your past, and the things that you've been through can help, like my family and the people that I interact with, like at the cosmetology school, know that nobody's perfect and it's okay, that we all have issues and situations from our past that don't have to define us, and that we can move forward from there, depending on, where we're at in life. So my goal is to be a mentor, not only to my children and, to be an awesome husband to my wife as best as I can, because we're all, men are not always the best at that, but also a mentor to the cosmetology students that I teach.
In your book, you talk about that your parents lived in Germany while most of the time that you were serving here in the United States. What did coming home mean to you back then? Or what did it mean when you remember your dad coming back from deployments, or even when he just came home from the day when you were a kid?
I remember my dad being gone some. He was home, also, but there was different schools that you have to go to in the military, and he was in Thailand for a year during the Vietnam War, and then me leaving home, I left the country. I was living in Germany. I left the country, and I had we were able to call each other, but there was a little bit of separation there. I feel like growing up, I didn't develop roots like people who lived in the same community for their entire life. So currently, my wife, she has lived in this town her entire life, and it was just a different world to me. I feel like coming home is where you're stationed, and you move around. And I think that has helped me develop a good sense of interacting with people and being flexible, but definitely a struggle when it comes to long-term relationships and roots. So that's something I've had to deal with over the years.
My wife, her parents were both in the Air Force, and they were just like you, moving from place to place. And the one thing I find about when she talks about her childhood is she really only remembers the last base that they were stationed at. And because there's no like anchor points for the memories, everything kind of blurs together. Mm-hmm. If her parents don't have repeat the memory very often, or she doesn't see it in a picture, then the memory really doesn't stay. And she remembers South Dakota, which was the last place that they were stationed, and that's really where almost all of her memories that she ever talks about come from.
Yeah, I have a bunch of really interesting stories that they're more humorous than my book. My book is a very serious topic with a faith background and kind of a redemption story. But on my blog, I have a whole other set of stories that I remember from all the different places I've lived, of some very interesting situations I got myself into that were more humorous. So I do have a lot of good memories. But definitely there's just no roots, as far as my own family, that cousins and all grandparents, it was just like random encounters and holidays and things like that. So it was really hard to develop a very deep relationship with people. And like I said, I still struggle with that today. I work on it. I've been married to my wife for 20 years. So we have an awesome relationship. And, but even with the students that I teach, they come in and out of my life 1 year at a time. So I think roots is something that military kids struggle with when you talk about coming home. Like I said, home is just kind of where you land, or where you're moving to next.
So if there's a listener out there, a dad who is currently in that mode of moving from base to base with their family, as an adult looking back, what message would you send them to think about with their kids, being that kid that was that person going back? Is there anything you'd want to tell them?
I think men are, and I'm just speaking for myself, I feel like men have a hard time talking about their feelings. And I think
the military, we're programmed not to. Field.
Exactly. So I think just letting people know, or in your family, like your children, your wife, know that you love them constantly is something that they're probably looking for. They're going to find it somewhere else. In today's modern age, it is so much easier to stay connected, though. My brother is currently downrange in Afghanistan, and we're able to communicate through Marco Polo, which is kind of like a social media app. I've talked to him on the phone, on Facebook Messenger. It's just a different world now than it was, I think, when you and I were both in the military.
Mm-hmm. And I served even just in Okinawa from 2004 to 2007. And I remember when we got Vonage for the first time, it was life-changing because we didn't do
right.
cards anymore. And it was just like, oh my gosh,
right.
There's no long distance anymore. It was hooray. It was over.
I remember the phone booths and the phone cards. Like having to call Germany to talk to my parents was a pretty big challenge.
Go ahead and dive into take the listeners back to your story a little bit, back from it was the late 80s, right? Was the timeline?
Yes, 1989 I joined the Army in 1987. My father was in the military for years, and he retired after 26 years. And then he did like another 20 years civil service. But, I had a real rich military history with grandparents from World War II, and, got, combat veterans, and even my siblings were all in the military. But so it's something I really wanted to do. And so I joined the Army with a lot of pride and passion, but I had a life hiccup, and not long after it was probably 18 months after being in the service, I ended up getting addicted to the drug ecstasy through some encounters, and I detail it all in the book. So, if anybody's interested, you can read it there. But I became so addicted.
Like it's a day-by-day journal almost.
Yeah. And I wanted to take people through the process of how quickly you can go from really good kid with an awesome, background and family to like a disaster in like a hot second.
Yeah. With a moral compass just going around in circles almost.
Yeah. And once the drugs took over, I just lost all sense of reason or anything. My brain was just constantly being numbed. And so after taking the drugs and becoming addicted to them, I started actually selling them. So on active duty, I was a drug dealer. And actually, not long after selling the drugs, I was turned in by somebody. And so there was an attempt of capturing and arresting by the Criminal Investigation Division of the Army. I actually did finally get arrested, and they told me that if I would be an informant for them, that they would let me back to my barracks. I was like, sure, no problem. But long story short, I just disappeared. I moved to Houston, Texas, and deserted my unit, which unfortunately at the time I didn't know they were being deployed to Panama. So I was charged with desertion and possession and distribution of drugs. So after about a 6 month break from the military, just running drugs back and forth between Texas and Louisiana, I ended up getting captured again, court-martialed, had my rank stripped from me. I had a dishonorable discharge issued to me, and then I had a 5-year prison sentence in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, which is the Army's version of a prison. I did 3 years, and during that 3-year period, I had an encounter with God that really got my attention. And like I said, I detail it all in the book, but there was a few moments throughout the time that I was incarcerated and the times I was running drugs that God really like jumped in and showed himself to me, and it got my attention. So there's.
Can you describe one of those moments for us?
Probably the most powerful was I had been clean for probably about 1.5 years, and I was working in the dining facility at Fort Leavenworth as a cook. And I had a guy walk up to me and stick out his hand, and I immediately recognized he had a hit of LSD, and I took it. So he had one, I had one, and so I basically relapsed after about 1.5 years of sobriety. And I got back to my barracks that night. I'm not sure how we didn't get caught because we were definitely messed up. It's a good way to describe it. But get back to my barracks, and on my desk was a letter from my father to my parole board because I was up for parole. And there was this one letter I was waiting from, and I opened it up, and in the letter it said that my father would stake his reputation, his job, and his life on the fact that I would never do drugs again. This was the same day that I relapsed. And so I felt like God was reaching out to me and saying, look, you're not hurting yourself, you're hurting everybody around you. This is not the life that I called for you. And at that moment I swore off drugs, and I've not done anything since. I haven't drank or done drugs since that day. I can't remember the exact day it was, but so I just say it was around 1990, and that's how long I've been clean.
It's when the universe gives us those signs, and they're powerful, because I've had a couple myself, and you don't always know why they're coming and why they're happening, but making sure, and it's a good thing that you were at least semi recovered, because your mind was at least able to perceive what was going on. Had you fully relapsed over like a couple of weeks, or even if that letter would have been a week later and you would have been doing it daily, then your brain might have actually not been able to see the light that God was trying to show you.
Correct.
When you first got out of Leavenworth, where did you go?
Well, my father was stationed in Omaha, Nebraska at Offutt Air Force Base, which is where we are now. And so when I got out, I had to go somewhere. I actually took parole to get out early. And so I moved to Omaha, and I worked a couple jobs. And then I went to cosmetology school, which was something I had always wanted to do. I kind of, in high school in Germany, got into the goth kind of new wave scene and really liked messing around with hair. So I thought, well, let's do this for a living. I also used to be kind of a barracks barber. You probably had a few of those. And so I really had a passion for cutting hair. And so I went to cosmetology school, and then after my 1-year program, I became an instructor as well. And so that's what I do now. I've been doing that since I graduated. So
one question I'd like to ask all the guests is, I'm a big believer that kids spell love TIME. Throughout your kids' life, what are some simple ways that they remember the most that you connect with them in their world?
Well, one of the things that we try and do is as a family, we are trying to eat dinner together, all together. It's a little bit more challenging now that my kids are a little bit older, because they have a lot of different activities they're involved in with dance and show choir and Girl Scouts and all that kind of stuff. But we do definitely try and sit around the dinner table and all hang out together as a family. And I think that's important. With my youngest, we do a devotion every morning, like a little Bible story every morning. And I know that my daughters seem to love it most when I listen to them and actually hear them, because I can tune out real fast. I get distracted, squirrel to the left, squirrel to the right. But when I'm actually engaged and listening and hear them, I think they feel the most loved.
Have you struggled having daughters connecting into their world as teenagers? I know that can be something that I'm not looking forward to, but I hear about it, that as your daughter's world evolves and as they get their own life and they get their own drama, like dads don't know anything about it. What was some things that you had to face through that?
Well, I can tell you that I've had over 20 years of experience dealing with 18 and 19-year-old girls because of the job I do. Being a cosmetology instructor, True. All I am is around women. I'm actually really awkward around males. It's kind of funny. So I understand them. However, I used to grill these students like, hey, what's your relationship with your father like? I was doing research, parenting research. And no matter how many times I felt like I had all the knowledge and all the pieces put together, my kids will throw me for a loop every time because they're so different. Everybody's unique. But luckily, and I'm blessed, my wife is awesome. And our kids, she's so active in their life, and they're just great kids. I haven't really had any major issues at all. And another thing, like I said before, the real is better than perfect situation. They all know my story. Both of my older two daughters here at home have read my book. And my youngest is still a little young for some of the material, so I'm waiting on that. But they know they don't want to do the things that their dad did, and they realize the consequences that are there. So it's been really cool being open with them about my past and my scars. And I think that's probably helped them understand that there are consequences in life that are not worth taking the risk for.
Not having the past that you have, but I feel like this thought happens that with a past like yours and becoming a dad, did you have a pile of fear that that part of your life was going to be repeating with your kids because of what happened in the past? Or did you already move past and like you had kind of maybe owned your past, that it wasn't going to be something that defined you in the future and your kids weren't going to be drug addicts just because you were? Or is that something you didn't deal with?
Well, I feel like we're really open with them about things. And so I think, and I've heard that's been a little bit, we have people that will shelter the children to the point where they don't know anything that's going on in the world. And so the first thing they do when they go out there is try it all. So I think we've just been pretty open with them about what we expect from them and what are the consequences. And I think talking about consequences and what's out there has really made it easier to be a parent. And I think, and I owe that a lot to my wife as well, because I think I would be more prone to try and protect them to the point where you're sheltering them too much. So I wasn't really worried about that as much. And like I said, just being open, I think helped a lot. So I'm not too worried. Still got one that's pretty young, but
I think
she's our wildest child.
Is the key, where I think it's often the similar with handguns, that I think as parents, you can have your opinion about guns, but having them, keeping them a mystery is often part of the problem. That as a parent, even just making sure everything is not a mystery, whether it be porn, sex, drugs, weapons, demystifying it is something that I think all parents have an obligation to do, and either telling them about guns, or when they get older, either going to a firing range so that they know what that feels like, they understand what it can do, they understand the consequences, like you say. That I think that your mindset was the erred on the right one, where being open about what's out there in the world. You can have your views, you can have your opinion, you can have your values that guide you through it, but ignoring that it's not there isn't going to help, because they're going to run into it and they're going to not even know what to do, and they're going to blue screen of death inside their head and end up going in places you didn't want them to, and you're going to try to figure out how to get them back.
Yeah, and I think they've been really open with us, and I don't want to be naive and say that my children are not going to make mistakes or do things that we probably don't approve of. However, they know for a fact that they can come to us no matter what. And I think that's something we've also instilled in them. We don't care what's going on. We'll deal with that later, but we want to make sure you're safe, you're okay. And so they've always been, I mean, this is just a silly story, but my daughter, my 16-year-old, a few years ago was over at her friend's house, and she wanted to watch 21 Jump Street because all the other kids were watching it. So my wife's like, hey, this is what's in that movie. And she's like, never mind, I don't want to watch it. But she called us to ask for permission, which is not normal. You know, most of the time kids do stuff and then ask for forgiveness
or
later. But luckily,
they walk around the house awkward because they're trying to hide something, but you can tell that something's off.
Yeah, right. So
I like that. This next question, I think, will tie in good. What do you want your daughters to remember about you when they're 30? If they're talking to their friends at a bar, what would you think that they would say about their dad?
I think the main thing they would probably say is that their father would work to death for them. I tried to provide a life for them, that they've had experiences and choices and things like that. And also that I love them no matter what, because I've tried to tell them that since they were little, and I think that they would do that. But they would also say that I'm not afraid to talk about my past and, like I said, my scars and everything. And it's cool when their friends come over and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're the dad that wrote the book about his past and stuff." And so, like, it's not something my past isn't something I'm proud of, and I'm just glad that people are able to use it to find help or make their lives better.
Do you run into people that are maybe like almost look down to you because of your past, like that they can't see past it?
I have only had one person, and it was a really good experience. It was actually in a Facebook group from my high school in Germany. And this person, obviously there's a lot of veterans, because that was my biggest fear, actually, was veterans looking down on me because I have a dishonorable discharge for deserting. And that's like probably the worst thing you can do as a soldier. But this one guy was just like kind of berating me a little bit, and everybody was jumping on this guy on Facebook like they do normally with social media. And I was like, hey, you guys, back off. The guy has his right to his opinion, and I'm totally fine with that. We ended up having a really good conversation at the end, and I tried to send him a copy of my book, but he wouldn't take it. I was like, I'll send you a free copy, really, just for your honorable service, and I appreciate everything you've done for me with your honorable service, providing the freedoms that I have, even though I, screwed that up. And I just tried to, give grace, and I'm not worried about it. I know who I am, and I know God who says I am, and I got the family support behind me, and they love me no matter what. So yeah, just the one Facebook guy so far.
Have you ever had any reconciliation, or maybe not real reconciliation, but long talk with your dad about after the getting out of jail and going through everything, of what was going through his mind or anything like that?
Yeah, because in the book, I detail some of the stuff he told me that I wasn't aware of, like after the trial, and he was broke down in the elevator at the hotel, having to watch his son being court-martialed. And unfortunately, I had to request his attendance because he would be a good character witness for me. So he had to get orders from his commander in order to go to his son's court-martial, which probably was very embarrassing for him, but he did it anyways because he's just like that. So, but before I wrote the book, I actually tried to contact everybody from my past. Thankfully, Facebook exists because I was able to contact most people and say, hey, I'm writing a story. This is our story. I'm going to be dragging my family through this mess again. And everybody was totally on board. And the benefit has been that a lot of people have received this book either through somebody, buying it for them, or me shipping them into prisons and inmates, and people who have requested copies of it for their family members who are struggling with addiction or currently behind bars. And that's my goal is, with some of the proceeds, I'm able to send books to people who really need to hear the message that your past doesn't have to define you.
And I'm sure you probably put this together, but the love that your dad showed you through one of your worst times in your life, that's a little bit how you described your love for your daughters, that you set that same example, that your dad was there for you and through the worst that you can imagine in your case. And hopefully you never go that low with your daughters, but you're still the same idea that no matter what your daughters do, whatever happens, I'll always be there to support you. I'll always be there and I won't be able to get you out of everything, but I'll always be there to listen. And so much, I think, of life in 2019 is just having that person to listen, which isn't something that our society encourages. It's almost like you got to keep it in, especially for men and especially for veterans, that you aren't allowed to have a thought outside of your head. You don't necessarily have a tribe of men surrounding you to talk to listen to. And that is a lot of where I think we get into trouble, where that voice inside your head becomes an echo chamber of where it's the only voice you can hear because it's so loud, because it's echoing in your walls. And you eventually realize that your family would be better without you.
Yeah, that's true. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who succumb to the negative thoughts, and it's a shame. It's very sad.
And I think even just through talking in this podcast and telling stories and hearing your story, that so much of what our past is, we try to keep it in the shadows because Facebook says you should have a perfect life. But that shadows can only hold so much. And once you bring it into light, like you've learned, like you could be worried about what people are saying and judging you. But then once you tell your story, once you go first, the world responds in a way that very few people ever get to see that haven't written a book like yours, that everybody has some story that can relate to yours, either a family member or maybe they were that person that, but you going first made it okay for them to talk about theirs.
Right. I think I heard Andy Andrews say that you're either coming out of a disaster, in a disaster, or headed for a disaster. Like there's something going on, and you never know where people are at in their stages. So yeah, being outspoken and telling people it's okay to have issues and situations and troubles, and just find somebody to talk to about it, or find a mentor, like you said on
I often hear
some of your podcasts.
When you see someone, always treat them with kindness, because you never know what it took them to get out of the bed and put clothes on that day.
Yeah, true.
You know exactly how much energy it actually took them to get to that point where they are at. Even if they look normal, that could have been like everything they had to get out of bed and put clothes on.
Yes, exactly.
What do you think the scariest moment as a dad has been so far for you?
Let's see. Scariest moment. I would think, so I struggle with trying to be in control all the time. I think that I need to have control. And like when my children were born,
you have little
there was
control
no control.
You're just observing.
Yeah, no control. Yeah, and all the way up to today. So my biggest thing is I don't want to fail my kids. I don't want to fail them. I don't want them to look back and go, man, my dad was like, he just wasn't there for me, or he failed. So I think the fear of failing them would be the scariest part, and just knowing that I have no control over them. Now, I don't want to control them, and I know that would be bad, but I just, you have expectations for yourself, for your marriage, for your kids, and you want things to turn out a certain way, and there's just a lot of life hiccups that can happen. And I guess just being prepared is the best thing. And then, like I said before, just I love you no matter what.
So, where do you think the control part comes from? Is it you just want to keep them safe, or is it something that it's come like about as you became a dad that you wanted to control in your life?
No, I think I have a do it yourself or it isn't going to get done mentality. Also, I grew up in a military household, and then, even being in prison, all my decisions were made for me. It's just a very controlled environment. So I feel like when things are out of control or chaotic, I don't know how to handle it. So I guess it's something I struggle with. And in my faith, being dependent and surrendering everything to God is hard for me, because I feel, they say, trust God for everything, but I know that if I don't get up out of bed and go to work, there's going to be no money and no food. So there's a fine line between doing something to make it happen and then relying on God to take care of it. And so that's where my struggle is, basically.
Another way I've often heard it put, that God doesn't give you anything that you can't handle. And so you do what you can handle and he'll handle the rest. And you just have to have faith that whatever you feel like you're overwhelmed with, just let it go. Cause then that means that you can't care. You're carrying as much as you can today. And I often think that's what the best part about being in a tribe, of any tribe that you have, where you can talk about things that you're not meant to carry everything in life on your own. And there's days where you need other people to carry things, and you need to be there's days where you need to tell someone the story that happened to you that day, because then it makes it that much lighter on your heart to carry it around with you. And sometimes you just need to let it go and put it in God's hands, that you're not meant to carry everything throughout your day. And
right.
So much of the society where we have this mentality of being alone, quiet desperation as men and dads, that just doesn't work towards being open and letting go. I mean, dads these days we're supposed to keep it all together. We're supposed to provide for the family, keep everything going, be the strong man, don't have emotions, don't cry. And there's only so much we can do. And we are emotional beings, and to deny that just makes it even harder on ourselves to carry all that burden. And it's just, we get so heavy inside our hearts, and sometimes we can't even receive love anymore because we've just been cut off from it.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
What do you want the family legacy of the David Mikes to be?
I think for my family, I would love for people to say that they loved others unconditionally. And that would be something I would want my kids to um, remember and to do every day, so that when they think of us, they think of love. And because God is love, and God lives in us, then we should show that to other people.
Is there anything that you've done as a parent to help them be put in situations where they do need to look past the situation inside the person?
Well, I just being in today's society, we go to public school. My kids go to public school, so I mean, just in that environment alone, there's every type of person that you can run into. So yeah, that's probably just living life and living life intentionally.
We don't have a lot of them, but I've been thinking with my own kids of just bringing them to even just like a homeless shelter or some type of meal on a holiday where you can volunteer and just see the opposite spectrum of your life, that you can come home to this life, but there's other people that are in a completely different world and mindset, and they need love just as much as anybody else does these days.
Yeah, that's true. We're all valuable.
Yeah. When you think of your story and where you found God and made that pivot to where you are today, and I don't know the answer to this question, and I'm not even sure if there is one, but if you were to send a message out there to another dad struggling, do you think when you're in that mode of drug addiction that you have to find your bottom before you can come back? Or do you feel that there's a different process that is out there if people find it? Or if there is there, I'm not even sure if I'm asking the question the right way, but did you feel like you needed to hit rock bottom in the way that you did in order for you to pivot out of it, I guess is another way to say it?
It's different for everybody. And I think that sometimes the bottom is death. So that is a scary place to look for. And some people say, oh, I'll quit because I know I can anytime, but I mean, too many people lose that battle. So I think rock bottom is like I said, a scary place to look for. I just think, and I know that you can't change people. So this is the other thing that I struggle with when I first started telling my story. I'm like, why don't people get it? Here's my story. They should not do what I did. But I realized that there's timing, and it's either God's timing, which pretty much runs the universe, right? But somebody has to want it. So if they don't want it, you can't change somebody's mind. Yeah. No. I mean, you can be there for them 1,000 times, but until they finally have that flip switched in their own mind that I don't want to do this anymore, or I want to come out of this, or whatever it is that you're struggling with, when you finally reach out for help, then, then you will go to the person who's always been there. So I think that's the key is, like you were saying before, you got to have a community of people that you can trust. So
did you feel any of your pivot was related to the environment change of Leavenworth versus being out there in Louisiana and Houston?
Meaning like being in confinement helped me gather my thoughts.
Just being in a different area, getting maybe back to controlled. It's more structured in prison.
I think when I first was confined, no, I was still kind of not right. It took me a while. There was, like I said, there was a few pivotal moments that had to happen in order for me to finally realize I needed to make some adjustments in life. And I will have to chalk it up to maturity. I joined the Army at 17, and that's good for some people, but it was definitely not good for me. I probably need a little bit more structure, a little bit more discipline, and a lot more maturity. And it actually took me 20 years to mature to the point where I could handle the gravity of this message and actually put it in a book. Because I think if I wrote it 10 years ago, it probably wouldn't have meant as much, and I probably wouldn't have been able to handle it like I'm able to handle it now.
And through time, the one thing you can gain more is perspective, that a lot of crap can happen in a life and you often have no idea why it's happening. Then you can look back 10 years and be like, that had to happen for the dominoes to end up where I'm at today. So you got perspective on that life of how that shaped you as a dad to raise your daughters and how that shaped your decisions. And now you add that wisdom to your book and makes it that much stronger. And
yes, exactly. I would say that is the case.
What do you think the biggest difference, and this question, I'm trying to think of the best way to set it up for you. What's the difference between the dad you are when you first started as a dad and the dad you are today? Let's frame it that way.
As a dad starting out, I think I didn't know what I was doing. And I think it was something that me and my wife grew in together. She wanted to be a mom so bad. When we got married, she loves children. She's actually the children's ministry director at her church because she loves children so much. And me, I knew it was something that would happen, when we got married, but it wasn't like I had this strong desire to be a dad. Just would be the natural chain of events. But being responsible for this little life and just watching them grow up and see how awesome my children have turned out, I'm just proud. And I fail, daily, whether I scream at when I'm frustrated, or I maybe get frustrated too quickly because my temper can fire up pretty fast. But I know that they know that I love them, and I'm super proud of them because they're just great people. My children are great people. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kind of where I ended up.
It's fine. It's good. It's a good answer. This is a good question. I think your perspective on it would be interesting. If a dad's looking to come home to their marriage from any stage, maybe they are completely disconnected. Maybe they are a drug addict and they're somehow hiding it through their life right now. If they want to come home to their marriage, what message would you send to them? Or what message do you want to share with them to hit them in the moment, maybe that this is the one where they feel they need to pivot?
Well, if you're in an addiction situation, drugs or anything like that, I think the biggest thing is like you got to seek out help and you've got to want it, and realizing that what you're doing is affecting other people, the people that you love, and their addiction it's a sickness that nobody can cure. You have to seek it out yourself. Like nobody can cure it for you, and it's awful. But in a marriage situation, and this is something that I have to work on constantly. I think you have to read marriage books, and you have to find married couples that you look up to that are still together after years and years of being together that still love each other. You have to intentionally pursue your wife every day. She needs to know that you find her beautiful and that you love her constantly, because you never can say that or do that enough. And you can usually tell when you're not doing it because things get rocky, and it's different for men. Men just want to be respected and feel that respect, but women need to know that they're loved constantly. I read a book called Love and Respect, and then a set of books called For Men Only and For Women Only, which were really beneficial for me to kind of understand my wife and who she is as a female and as a woman and as a wife and as a mother versus just like a partner. But she will probably tell you I still need work. It's the never ending, but awesome and rewarding role as being a husband and a father.
I think the one thing that the mistake that we make in marriage in general is that somehow we already have been conditioned all of our life that we have to go through some type of school class to learn something. Very few things in life are you just gifted with the knowledge to understand how it works. Maybe eating, showering, cleanliness, those are things that your brain just kind of figures out. But marriage is something we just assume we will walk into it and automatically know how to do it. But it's the same idea. You can't just wake up one day and do it. You've got to work at it. You got to train for it and grow together.
And I think with the divorce rate being about 50% in North America, then half of us are doing it wrong. And then in the 50% that are together, there's, what is the percentage that's actually working right? So
I heard I just heard it in a podcast. 17% are actually what they would call as extraordinary marriages, where they're working, they're growing, they're happy.
That's scary. It's a scary figure.
So the rest of that other percentage is just people that are just willing to be miserable and be okay with it.
Yes. That is not good.
Those are people swearing at the Walmart people at the checkout line because they're just taking out on others that are miserable in life.
Right.
What is a resource or a book you would recommend to other military veteran dads, and why?
Well, just as being a father in that aspect, I would say Strong Father, Strong Daughter, or Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters by Meg Meeker. That's a great book. It's a little bit older book, but it's still relevant. And I did have a version for sons as well that she wrote afterwards, but I thought that book was really good. So I would say that would be a good one. My favorite book of all time is Unbroken, which is Louis Zamperini's story, which has nothing to do with being a father and nothing to do with being a husband, but it has more to do with your life does not suck as bad as you think it does, because man, that guy went through so much. And every time I like reading stories about people who overcome great odds and obstacles, because it just helps me realize where I am and that I've got it way better than I think I do most of the time.
So I got to ask, in the Strong Father, Strong Daughter book, because that book scared the hell out of me. Because like the first 75% of it is just like what the world you're facing.
Statistics.
Yeah. What part resonated with you the most?
She was telling a story about, I don't know if it was her or it was somebody, one of her cases where the father like went into a nightclub, grabbed her daughter and was like, "You're coming home with me," because he was in a bad place. But it was like just being present and letting them know, like, I will do anything to save you and protect you and keep you safe.
The story that resonated with me is the one where the daughter was being bullied by the teacher, and the father took it upon himself to essentially mentor her through those days instead of trying to remove her from the classroom, which is what her mom wanted to do. That so much of our role as a father to our daughters is to be that lighthouse through the world that they're trying to enter and figure out who they are. And a couple other key messages that I take away from that book is just reminding them they're good enough, they're beautiful, and that I love them. And I constantly give them hugs because I don't want them to go out into the world and seek something that they were lacking from me. And I know that by not having that is going to perpetually make them make more left turns than they need to in life. And I just want to be that anchor. Even just every night we talk about what happened at school when we go to bed and working it through. There's a book that we read called Someday a Bird Will Poop on You. And so we call this talk bird poop talk. So I ask her, who pooped on you today? Because then we try to talk like, was that how you should have reacted? Did you respond or did you react? And a bird will poop on you for the rest of your life. And you got to figure out how you respond to it. And just constantly working her through those situations, I think is what I took away from that book, is just that the role that we play in our daughters' lives is so impactful. Even part of this mission of why I started it, that as fathers, we have the ability to shape this world in a way that very few people have. That we talk about masculinity or toxic masculinity and all that stuff that's going on today, Me Too, all of that stuff, that fathers have a role to play in shaping the next dialogue and changing the next generation of women. And especially military veteran fathers, that we just have a perspective of a wide variety of melting pot. We know where lots of things happen. We've seen a lot of stuff happen. And we just have a good way of being able to articulate that to our daughters and help them lead them through life and what we learned and what we don't want them to do. And it's just made me step up to my role and hopefully help other military veteran dads step up to the role as we start sharing stories and continue the podcast journey.
Yeah, I might have to get a copy of that book.
Which book?
The bird that will poop on you book.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't wrote a book about this yet. But yeah, it's a little small book. It's not big, but it's real good. It's maybe written for a little bit older kids because some of the examples are ones they might not understand, but it resonates in a way that she understands, and she gets upset if we don't talk about bird poop. So
yeah, that seems like a good nightly routine.
Yeah. What's a parting piece of advice you would like to leave for other military veteran dads?
I would say, please seek out community. Like we were talking about mentorship and everything, but community, big time. I have the support of my family, which is awesome, but I would not been able to do the things I've done over the past 5 years with my book and my blogging and writing and all that without the power of community, because of the support and encouragement from other people. Some of the Facebook groups I'm in are people that I've not ever met in person, but have played a huge role in impact in me being able to get my story out there to the world. So community is huge. And it doesn't have to be, there's 2D and 3D. 2D is people but have never met in person, and 3D would be somebody you've met in person. It could be a 2D relationship that can get you where you need to be.
I feel like the 2D ones, from at least my story, 2D helped get me to where I was. But the part about 2D is it's still not real. And you still have that gap inside yourself that you need that 3D connection. So you can kind of train in 2D, but it's extremely important to seek out that. And that's what I'm currently doing right now here in my local town, of just connecting and just having lunch, coffee, but anything that a dad that's willing to hang out, I'm stepping up and just trying to make one connection at a time. And I feel a lot fuller after I've done that connection more than 2D, because it's good, but then it doesn't always last. And you need that physical tribe, because as we learned, Facebook can go down for a day, and you're going to need to have real people in life.
Yeah.
To live Facebook might not be there one day, and and then you're going to be addicted. Whereas like, oh my God, I don't know how to talk to people in real life, and I need to talk to someone. Facebook's down. What am I going to do?
Right. That is true.
Well, I've absolutely loved this conversation, David, and we went into places that we have not gone into this on the podcast so far. And I think this is an area that didn't affect me in my life, but I know it affects others, and many others in their life. Many stories for military begin with a prior past of drug addiction. So, and that worry of relapse. And so I know we definitely connected with a lot of military dads today. If any dads want to get connected with you, what's the best way to find you?
Well, on Facebook, just kidding. We just talked about that. But actually on Facebook, I use the handle Dilemma Mike on all my social media. It's a DILEMMAMIKE. So people have a hard time spelling dilemma for some reason. But my blog is dilemmamike.com. All my social media is there. I'm on Twitter. You can find me pretty much if you Google David Mike, I pop up because of my blogs and stuff. So yeah, that would probably be the easiest way through my social media.
And I'll go ahead and include those links in the show notes for anybody who wanted to a quicker way to find them.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it.
David, well, thank you for coming on the show, and well, hopefully bring some dads home with this message.
Awesome.
That's a wrap. And thank you for listening to today's show, and I really hope you enjoyed it. The lifeblood of any new podcast are the reviews. If you haven't reviewed the podcast yet on iTunes, I would really appreciate it, and you will help us get the message out to even more military veteran dads. As John Maxwell says, if there is hope in the future, there is power in the present. Dads, it's time to come home.